My name is Harold. I'm 72 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been a man who loved to walk. Long walks in the park with my wife, strolling down to the corner store for fresh bread, even chasing after my grandkids in the backyard. Those simple joys used to fill my days. But somewhere along the way, something changed. It started as a dull ache in my right leg, just behind the knee. Nothing too serious, or so I thought. It's just age, I told myself. But within months, that little ache grew into a sharp, gnawing pain that made every step feel like punishment. I remember one evening, standing in the kitchen trying to cook dinner. My leg felt so heavy, like it was chained to the floor. I leaned against the counter just to keep from collapsing. My wife looked at me with worry in her eyes, and I felt embarrassed. Embarrassed that I couldn't even stand long enough to stir a pot of soup. And then there were the nights. Oh, those endless nights. Lying in bed, the pain burning through my calf and thigh, robbing me of sleep. I would shift and turn, searching for a position that didn't hurt. Sometimes I'd wake up with tears in my eyes, not from crying, but from sheer exhaustion. It wasn't just the pain, it was what the pain stole from me. I stopped going on walks with my wife. I avoided the park because I couldn't keep up. Even my grandkids noticed. One day, my little granddaughter asked, "Grandpa, why don't you run with us anymore?" I didn't know what to say. Inside, I felt like a piece of me was slipping away. The strong, active man I had always been was disappearing. And maybe you felt it too. That moment when your body no longer listens to you, when every step feels heavier than the last. When pain starts to whisper that maybe your best days are already behind you. So let me ask you, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever looked at your own legs, your own body, and thought, why is this happening to me? The pain didn't just stay in my leg, it spread into my life. At first, it was the little things. Missing my morning walks, avoiding the stairs because every step sent a jolt up my thigh. But soon, it wasn't just inconvenience, it was limitation, it was defeat. I used to be the kind of man who fixed things around the house. A squeaky door hinge, a leaky faucet. I loved keeping busy. But suddenly, kneeling down to tighten a screw became unbearable. I'd squat halfway, then wince and give up, frustrated with myself. And then there were the social moments. My friends invited me to play a round of golf one Saturday. I used to love those mornings. The laughter, the friendly competition, the smell of fresh-cut grass. But that day, I sat at home, staring out the window because I couldn't face the thought of walking the course. I told them I was busy, but the truth, I was ashamed. Even the grocery store became a battlefield. I remember standing in the aisle, holding onto the cart for balance, pretending to study the labels while my leg throbbed with every heartbeat. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of a freezer door. My face was tight, my jaw clenched. I didn't recognize that man. He looked tired, worn, defeated, and it wasn't just me who noticed. My wife started asking, "Do you want me to go alone this time?" My kids stopped suggesting family hikes. Even my grandkids, who used to beg me to push them on the swings, started running straight to their parents instead. I felt invisible, like I was fading into the background of my own family, and yet the pain was always there to remind me. One night, I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my aching calf when my son walked in. "Dad," he said gently, "you're not yourself anymore." His words cut deeper than the pain itself, because he was right. It was like my life was shrinking. Every no I gave, every activity I avoided, every excuse I made, it was like watching my world close in around me. And maybe you've been there too. That slow retreat when the things you love slip through your fingers because your body won't let you hold on to them anymore. When you say, "I'll pass," even though your heart longs to say yes. I kept wondering, how much more will I lose? It all came to a breaking point one cold November morning. I remember waking up, my legs stiff and screaming in pain. Just swinging it over the side of the bed felt like dragging a block of concrete. My wife had already left for her morning walk, something we used to do together. I stayed behind, staring at the floor, wondering how I had gotten here. That morning, I tried to put on my socks. Something so simple, something I'd done thousands of times without thinking. I bent down, reached for my foot, and the pain shot through me like a lightning bolt. I froze. I couldn't move. After a few seconds, I gave up. I sat there, sock in hand, feeling useless. My hands started to shake, not from age, but from frustration. And before I realized it, there were tears rolling down my face. Silent, shameful tears. It wasn't just about the sock, it was about everything. I felt trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed me. A body that had betrayed me. I started asking myself dangerous questions. Is this it? Is this the beginning of the end? Am I going to spend the rest of my life like this, watching the world move while I sit still? I stopped answering the phone when friends called. I skipped Sunday service because I couldn't bear the stares of concern from people who used to see me strong. Even family dinners became a chore because I didn't want my children and grandchildren to see me like this. Broken, fragile. And yet, the loneliness was even heavier than the pain. Nights were the worst, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick while my leg throbbed. Every second felt like an hour. Sometimes I'd whisper to myself, I can't do this anymore. There's a kind of pain that doesn't just live in the body, it seeps into the soul. It makes you doubt who you are. It makes you believe your story is already written and that the last chapters are filled with nothing but decline. That was me. I was ready to give up. And maybe you've felt something like that too. That moment when you're so worn down, so tired of hurting, that you stop hoping for change. When you start to accept a smaller life, because you don't see any other way. That morning, as I sat there holding that sock, unable to even dress myself, I whispered words I never thought I'd say. Maybe I'm done. Hope has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. For me, it came on a quiet afternoon, sitting on my front porch. My neighbor Carol stopped by. Carol is in her late 60s, always cheerful, the kind of woman who carries sunshine with her. She noticed me sitting there, rubbing my leg, my face twisted with pain. "Harold," she said gently, "you don't look so good. What's going on?" I hesitated. For months, I had hidden my struggle from friends. But something about her kind eyes broke me open. I told her everything. The sleepless nights, the shrinking world, the moment I couldn't even put on my socks. She listened quietly, nodding, and then said something that caught me off guard. "You know," she whispered, leaning closer as if sharing a secret, "there's something my grandmother used to make, an old homemade oil. She swore by it whenever her legs hurt." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Carol, I've tried every cream, pill, and pain patch out there. What makes this oil any different?" She smiled. "Because it's natural, because it's simple, and because I've seen it work." She went back into her house and returned with a small glass jar filled with golden liquid. It had a faint, earthy smell with a hint of herbs. She handed it to me like it was something precious. "Rub this on your leg before bed, just 3 nights. Then tell me if you don't feel a difference." I raised an eyebrow. 3 nights? After months of agony, that sounded too good to be true, but I was desperate. What did I have to lose? That evening, I followed her instructions. I warmed the oil slightly between my hands and massaged it into my leg from the knee down to the ankle. The texture was smooth, almost silky, and the scent filled the room, herbal, calming, like a forest after the rain. As I lay down that night, I wasn't expecting miracles. I just hoped for a few minutes of relief. But something unexpected happened. The burning sensation that usually kept me awake seemed to soften. My leg felt lighter, calmer. I actually drifted off to sleep without tossing and turning. The next morning, I woke up and realized I had slept through the night. For the first time in months, I didn't want to believe it was the oil. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe my body was just too tired. But a little spark of curiosity lit inside me. And you know what? That spark was enough. Because when you're drowning in pain, even the smallest hint of hope feels like a lifeline. The first night had surprised me. For months, my sleep had been broken, shallow, constantly interrupted by pain. But after using Carol's homemade oil, I actually slept. Not perfectly, but better, and that was something. The second night, I decided to repeat the ritual. I warmed the oil between my palms and massaged it into my leg, slowly, carefully, as though I were coaxing life back into tired muscles. The warmth spread, and with it came a kind of quiet comfort. By the time I lay down, my body felt lighter. That night, I dreamed. I hadn't dreamed in months. Usually my nights were filled with groans, position changes, and long hours staring at the ceiling. But that night, I actually drifted deep enough to dream of something simple. I was walking with my granddaughter, hand in hand, through a field of tall grass. When I woke up, my face was wet. Not from pain this time, but from relief. By the third night, something undeniable happened. The stabbing ache that usually greeted me the moment I shifted in bed wasn't there. The tightness in my calf had loosened, and when I stood up the next morning expecting the usual sting of pain in my leg, I froze in shock. It wasn't gone, but it was different, softer, duller, manageable. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could stand without gritting my teeth. At breakfast, my wife noticed it before I even said a word. "You're moving better today," she said, tilting her head, watching me with cautious hope. I shrugged, trying not to smile too wide. Maybe it's this oil Carol gave me. She raised her eyebrows, half skeptical, half amazed. "Homemade oil? And you're telling me it actually works?" I laughed. "I'm not saying anything yet, but I'm saying I feel different." That day, I tried something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked down to the mailbox, just a few steps down the driveway, but to me, it felt like a victory parade. The air was crisp, the sun warm on my face. Each step was careful, tentative, but possible. When I came back inside, my wife was standing at the door with tears in her eyes. "Harold," she whispered, "you're coming back to me." And that hit me hard, because the truth was, I was coming back to myself too. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't instant, but it was enough to remind me that healing, even slow healing, is still healing, and maybe that's all any of us need. Not perfection, not overnight cures, just a sign that things can get better. Just 3 nights. That's all it took for me to believe in the possibility of change again. By the time the third night had passed, I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was happening. The oil wasn't just soothing me in the moment. It was changing the way my leg felt, the way I slept, even the way I moved during the day. But I'm not the kind of man who jumps at snake oil promises. I needed to know why. So I started reading, digging through articles online, and even calling up my daughter. She's a nurse, and she's always been the one to help me separate fact from fiction. What I learned amazed me. This homemade oil wasn't some miracle potion. It was built on ingredients that had been studied for centuries. The base was sesame oil, something ancient cultures had used for joint pain, inflammation, and circulation. In fact, I discovered that in traditional medicine, sesame oil has been called the queen of oils because of its ability to penetrate deep into the skin and carry healing compounds with it. Then there was turmeric, that golden spice most of us keep in the kitchen without realizing its power. Scientists at Harvard and Johns Hopkins have published research on curcumin, the active compound in turmeric. Curcumin is known for fighting inflammation at the cellular level. One study even showed that people with knee pain reported significant improvement after adding curcumin to their routine. And here's the part that struck me. Inflammation is at the root of so many aches and pains as we age. When the body's tissues swell and stiffen, every step becomes harder. What this oil did was simple. It calmed the fire inside my leg. Another ingredient Clara mentioned was ginger root extract. I read that researchers from the University of Miami tested ginger on people with arthritis, and those who took it daily had much less pain and stiffness. Ginger has compounds called gingerols that act almost like natural pain relievers. When I put all of this together, it finally made sense. The oil wasn't magic, it wasn't a cure, but it was nature lending a hand, helping my body calm the inflammation, relax the muscles, and restore circulation where I needed it most. Even my daughter, who's usually skeptical about home remedies, admitted, "Dad, there's real science behind this. These aren't just old wives' tales. These plants have compounds that work. People just forget how powerful nature can be." And that was all the validation I needed. Because deep down, I realized something important. It's not always about a new pill or another prescription or some expensive treatment. Sometimes the answer is already in the simple gifts the earth has been offering us for thousands of years. So no, this wasn't a miracle. It was just nature doing what it does best, helping us heal, one layer at a time. After those first 3 nights, I made a decision. This oil was staying in my life. But I knew that if I wanted the change to last, I had to do more than just hope. I had to build a routine. So every evening, like clockwork, I created a ritual. I'd warm a small spoonful of the oil in my hands, rub it gently into my leg, and let the scent fill the room. My wife would smile, sometimes even help me with the massage, turning it into a quiet moment we shared together. It wasn't just about the oil. It became an act of care, of slowing down, of telling my body, "You still matter. I'm taking care of you." But something else started happening. The oil gave me back enough strength to try other small changes. I began walking again, just 5 minutes at first, down the block and back. The fresh air felt like medicine. Each day, I went a little farther. I also looked at my diet. For years, I had indulged in too much sugar and fried food. But now, with hope creeping back in, I felt motivated to make better choices. I added more leafy greens, berries, and whole grains. And believe it or not, I even started drinking a cup of ginger tea in the afternoons. Sleep, which used to be my greatest enemy, became easier. The pain didn't wake me up as much, and I began respecting a bedtime routine. No late-night TV, no heavy meals before bed, just a calm wind down with the oil and a book. My family noticed the difference. One evening, my daughter came by and caught me stretching in the living room. "Dad," she laughed, "I haven't seen you do that in years." And I grinned, because she was right. It wasn't just my leg getting stronger, it was my spirit. The truth is, the oil wasn't the only answer. It was the spark that reminded me to start caring for myself again. Because health, especially at our age, isn't about one big miracle. It's about small choices, repeated every day, that build into something powerful. And that's what I want to tell you. The oil gave me a start, but it was the walking, the better food, the gentle stretching, the mindful rest. It was all of it together that made me feel alive again. It turns out, the sum of small choices really does make all the difference. Weeks turned into months, and I could hardly believe the difference. The man who once sat on the edge of the bed, defeated by a pair of socks, was slowly returning to life. I remember the first time I walked all the way through the park again, the same path I had abandoned months earlier because of the pain. The trees were swaying, children were laughing, and my wife was walking beside me, this time without slowing her pace for me. For the first time in years, I wasn't a burden, I was her partner again. And the mailbox walk? That turned into a daily ritual, then into 2 laps around the block, then into something even bigger. One Saturday, my son invited me to join him and the grandkids for a picnic by the lake. A year ago, I would have said no. This time, I said yes. And not only did I go, I carried the basket. That day, as we sat on a blanket, the grandkids running around us, my son looked at me and said quietly, "Dad, you're back." Those words, they hit harder than any pain I'd ever felt. But this time, they didn't break me. They rebuilt me. The oil had become a part of my routine, yes. But the real gift was freedom. Freedom to move, to live, to be present again. I could kneel down to tie my shoes without wincing. I could stand long enough to cook dinner with my wife. I could play catch with my grandson without fearing the aftermath. And here's something I didn't expect. The fear disappeared. For so long, I had been afraid of the pain, afraid of losing myself, afraid that aging meant the end of joy. But now, I wasn't afraid anymore. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my porch, my granddaughter climbed into my lap and said, "Grandpa, you don't sit so much anymore. You play with us now." I kissed the top of her head, and in that moment, I realized I had gotten something back that no medicine had ever given me: hope. And today, I can say this with certainty: I no longer fear getting older, because I know now that even small, natural changes can breathe life back into days you thought were gone forever. The oil didn't just soothe my leg, it gave me back my life. Looking back, I sometimes wonder, what if Carol hadn't stopped by that afternoon? What if I had stayed silent, ashamed of my pain, convinced that nothing could change? Maybe I'd still be stuck in that chair, staring out the window at a world moving on without me. But instead, I took a chance on something simple, something natural. And that small step opened the door to a life I thought I'd lost forever. Here's what I've learned: it's never too late. Not to move, not to change, not to hope again. If you're listening to my story right now and you feel like your body is betraying you, if you've sat at the edge of your bed, wondering if the best days are behind you, I want you to hear me clearly. Don't give up. You don't need a miracle. You don't need perfection. What you need is one small spark of hope, one simple step that tells your body and your soul, "I'm not done yet." For me, it was a homemade oil. For you, it might be something different: a natural tea, a daily walk, a small change in what you eat. Whatever it is, don't dismiss it. Sometimes the tiniest choices lead to the biggest transformations. So let me ask you, do you struggle with leg pain or joint pain that steals your sleep at night? Have you ever tried a natural remedy, something passed down through family, something simple that gave you real relief? If so, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below, because your words might be the spark of hope that someone else desperately needs. And if this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to a friend, a parent, a neighbor, someone you know who's hurting. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is a reminder that healing is possible. I'll leave you with this: aging isn't the end, it's just another chapter. And with the right care, with a little faith in nature, and with the courage to try, that chapter can still be beautiful. Today, I don't just walk without fear. Today, I look forward with hope.